The median retirement savings for an American household sits at $87,000. That same group of Americans believes they need approximately $1.46 million to retire with comfort. That gap, $1.37 million, is not a minor calculation error. It represents roughly 17 years of median household income in cash that the majority of people simply don't have. And here is what makes that figure truly unsettling. Many of the people holding that $87,000 were, at some point during their 50s, earning more than they ever had before. Some were bringing in six-figure salaries, some were receiving bonuses. The income was present. What was absent was a clear structural understanding of the one thing their 50s were going to require of them. And they missed it during a period when everything else seemed to finally be falling into place. There are four distinct layers to that mistake. By the time this video ends, you will have seen every one of them. And I'll be upfront with you now. The fourth one is the layer that destroys retirement plans that appear perfectly solid on paper. Before we move forward, something needs to be said plainly because context matters here. This video is not about people who are careless or irresponsible. It is not about people who were unaware they should be saving or who spent money on things they didn't value. The people who reached retirement without enough money overwhelmingly followed the advice they were given. They opened 401k accounts. They paid a financial advisor 1% of their assets annually to tell them to hold steady. They paid for their children's college education. They stepped in financially when their parents needed help. The error they made was not rooted in laziness, and it was not rooted in ignorance. It was a collection of decisions that each made complete sense on their own, but became destructive when combined. And every one of those decisions happened during the decade when life finally seemed to be working the way it was supposed to. That is the most dangerous category of mistake, the kind that wears the face of success. Here is the image I want you to keep in your mind throughout this entire video, because I'll return to it more than once. Think about what an aircraft needs in order to lift off the ground. It needs the entire runway, not 90% of it, all of it. The speed has to build across the full length of the strip because of how lift is generated. The acceleration compounds. If the plane is moving too slowly at the beginning, there is no way to compensate for that in the final stretch. Your 50s represent the last third of that runway. The compounding you skipped in your 30s and 40s can still be partially recovered during this period, but only if you use every remaining foot of the strip. What most people do instead is treat this final stretch like a destination rather than a launch point. They ease up, and the plane never leaves the ground. In a few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the single most underreported retirement risk in this country, one that has almost nothing to do with investment returns and everything to do with the statistical reality about employment that most people in their 50s have never encountered in print. But first, let me show you the specific financial trap that makes that risk so much more damaging when it eventually arrives. Here is the first part of the mistake. Generation X, currently ranging from their late 40s into their early 60s, spends more than any other age group, with average annual household expenditures approaching $96,000 according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Read that again. Not the generation with the lowest income, the generation with the highest spending. Lifestyle inflation is always a threat to savers, but it becomes particularly harmful in your 50s. At that stage of life, income typically reaches its peak and expenses could theoretically begin to drop. The word there is could. In practice, spending tends to accelerate instead. And the reason behind that is more psychological than financial. When you enter your 50s with a solid income, something shifts in how you think. After 25 years of putting things off and telling yourself the vacation could wait, that the kitchen was functional enough, you finally have the financial means to stop deferring. And that sense of having earned it is not irrational. It is one of the most deeply human feelings there is. The boat is not wrong. The renovation is not wrong. What is wrong is failing to understand what each of those purchases does to the math behind your retirement. Here is the exact mechanism at work. Whatever your spending looks like during your highest earning years becomes the baseline that your retirement must be able to sustain. Your 50s frequently bring peak earnings, and peak earnings have a quiet way of becoming peak spending. A larger home, better vehicles, more frequent travel. Each upgrade feels deserved, but together they shift your cost of living to a level your retirement savings may be unable to support. On top of that, a more expensive lifestyle requires an even larger nest egg to maintain it. If your annual spending rises from $70,000 to $90,000 during your 50s, you have just added approximately $500,000 to your required retirement number under standard withdrawal calculations. Not because of a bad investment, because of a kitchen remodel and a slightly upgraded car. And almost nobody is working through that specific calculation when they're signing the contractor's estimate. According to the Federal Reserve, Americans in their 50s currently carry more debt across mortgages, auto loans, and credit cards than prior generations did at the same age. That is not a finding about reckless behavior. That is a finding about the accumulated weight of a generation that finally gave itself permission to spend. Now I want to make this tangible through a specific person. I'll refer to him as Marcus. He is 52 years old. He earns $140,000 annually as a project manager at an engineering firm. By virtually every visible measure, Marcus appears to be doing well. He has a 401k containing $380,000. He owns a home with reasonable equity. His children are nearly finished with college. He has a financial advisor. He is contributing to his retirement account. And for the past 3 years, Marcus has been telling himself that once the kids are done with school, he will really start maxing everything out. That plan is the trap. I'll return to Marcus at the end of this video with the actual numbers. But first, I need to show you what is happening to his savings right now, inside the three-drain structure that hits nearly everyone in his position at the same time. A Bankrate survey from 2024 found that 61% of parents made financial sacrifices to support their adult children. 61%. That means more than half of the people in their prime wealth-building years are actively redirecting retirement capital toward grown kids. I am not making a parenting argument here. I am making a mathematical one. Your children have decades ahead of them to recover from a financial setback. You do not. You can borrow money for almost anything. A car, a home, a college education. Except retirement. Nobody will lend you money to fund your 70s. The second drain is the aging parent problem. Roughly 50 million Americans are currently providing some form of care to an older adult. When the caregiver is in their 50s, the timing is particularly brutal because they are being financially squeezed from two directions at the exact moment they should be loading capital onto the runway. The third drain is the one you can't see. It is the psychological shift that occurs when the fear of financial instability finally goes quiet. In your 30s and 40s, financial anxiety actually serves a function. It creates discipline. It makes you say no. When income peaks in your 50s and the immediate pressure fades, that anxiety disappears. And with it goes the behavioral engine that powered your savings to begin with. The discipline loosens at the precise moment it needs to tighten. Not because you became careless, because you finally feel secure. And in this context, feeling secure comes with a price tag. You might be thinking, that's all about behavior and I can manage my behavior. But here is where I want to shift the framing entirely. You think the problem is overspending. The real problem is that you're building your plan around an assumption that the data says is almost certainly inaccurate. Stay with me, because what comes next changes the math on everything discussed so far. Here is a statistic that receives almost no attention in mainstream financial coverage. More than half of all workers aged 50 and older lost jobs they had held for a long time. Not voluntarily, but because they were laid off or otherwise pushed out. A study from the Urban Institute found that many older workers face unexpected financial disruptions during the very period when saving and planning for retirement is most important. More than half, and overall, 66% of people working full-time in their early 50s in long-term positions eventually left their employer involuntarily. To be precise about what that research was measuring, the study focused specifically on workers who entered their 50s with stable full-time employment and had been with the same employer for at least 5 years. the workers least likely to face employment problems. It only counted separations that resulted in at least 6 months of unemployment, or at least a 50% drop in earnings. These are not marginal employees or workers with unstable track records. 28% of stable, long-tenured workers experienced at least one damaging layoff between turning 50 and leaving the workforce for retirement. We've known that some workers get a nudge from their employers to exit the workforce, and some get a great big kick, said Gary Burtis, a prominent labor economist associated with the Brookings Institution. Your position may feel secure, especially if you've been with the same organization for many years. But artificial intelligence is actively reshaping the labor market. In March of 2025, AI was the leading cited reason for job cuts by U.S.-based employers, according to a report from Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. The structural forces pushing older workers out of employment are gaining momentum, not slowing down. Here is what happens when that exit arrives before you planned for it. When older workers find new employment after an involuntary separation, they earn on average 25% less than their previous salary. The strategy to catch up, to maximize contributions for the years remaining, is built on the assumption that those remaining years are fully yours to control. For the majority of workers in their 50s, they are not, and the chain reaction that follows is entirely predictable. As unemployed workers reach Social Security eligibility at age 62, the likelihood increases that they will stop searching for new work. Those who enter retirement early face serious financial risk, with 40% of workers in their 50s today who retire at 62 likely to see their income fall to less than twice the federal poverty level. Claiming Social Security at 62 rather than waiting until full retirement age at 67 means accepting permanently reduced benefits, not temporarily, but for life. The long-term impact is significant, with median income in households that experienced an involuntary job loss running 14% lower than in households that did not, even though both groups had nearly identical earnings before the disruption. The plan to save more once the kids graduate doesn't survive a layoff notice. The plane ran out of runway. Understanding these numbers is one thing. Constructing a system around them is a different challenge entirely. I had access to this data for years before I figured out how to translate it into an actual plan. That gap between knowing the risk and having a framework to defend against it is why I spent roughly a year developing what I call the exit code. It's a digital book, 8 chapters of retirement data analysis with no filler, built around a mathematical framework for converting a vague retirement vision into a specific, defensible date. It covers what I call the 58% rule, along with the buffer structure needed to guard against a forced early exit, because the data shows that involuntary early retirement is not an edge case. It is the median outcome for workers in stable, full-time employment entering their 50s. It also covers the $14,000 invisible bill, the healthcare costs that destroy retirement timelines that appear fully funded on paper, which I'll address in the next section. And it covers the dynamic withdrawal method, which replaces the rigid 4% rule with a strategy that actually reflects the way spending shifts across a 30-year retirement. The exit code is grounded in 50 years of real retirement data, and you can access it for less than the cost of a single hour with a mediocre financial advisor through the link in the description. The difference between knowing this data and having a system built around it is the difference between watching the problem unfold and actually solving it before it arrives. By the way, hit subscribe if you're finding value here. Otherwise, the algorithm may stop surfacing these videos to you entirely. Now let me show you the cost that doesn't appear on any standard retirement calculator, because it lives in the gap between leaving work and turning 65. Your retirement plan almost certainly includes a healthcare line item, and it almost certainly starts at 65 when Medicare coverage begins. That 3-year gap, from 62 to 65, if you are pushed out early or choose to leave before Medicare eligibility, is where the invisible bill lives. Health insurance represents one of the largest expenses facing individuals who retire before age 65. Monthly premiums of roughly $1,100 to $1,200 per person can meaningfully affect how long retirement savings hold out, especially when combined with other core living costs. Because these expenses occur before Medicare eligibility begins, early retirees often need to account for several years of elevated healthcare spending when assessing whether their retirement timeline is financially sustainable. Let me convert that into annual figures. Healthcare may consume a substantial share of retirement income. Paying approximately $13,000 to $14,000 per year in premiums per person can absorb a significant portion of annual retirement income, particularly for households drawing from savings or investment accounts. For a couple, that's $26,000 to $28,000 per year in premiums alone, before any actual medical expenses, before copays, before prescriptions. At the close of 2025, the enhanced premium tax credits that had reduced ACA premiums since 2021 expired and were not extended into 2026. For early retirees, the subsidy cliff has returned. Anyone earning above roughly $62,600 as a single individual in 2026 pays full price for marketplace coverage, which can exceed $1,500 per month at age 62 depending on location. $1,500 per month per person. And here's where I want to address what happens after age 65, because the assumption that Medicare resolves the problem is also incorrect. Healthcare is one of the largest expenses Americans face throughout retirement, and one of the most difficult to forecast accurately. According to Fidelity Investments' 2025 retiree healthcare cost estimate, the average 65-year-old who retired in 2025 will spend an average of $172,500 on healthcare and medical expenses over the course of retirement, not including long-term care costs. $172,500 not counting the nursing facility, not counting long-term care. Long-term care expenses can range from approximately $50,000 per year for home-based care to more than $110,000 per year for nursing home care, with an average duration of need around 33 months. There's a version of this that sounds darkly comedic. You spend your entire career afraid of running out of money, then you retire and discover there's a line item called your own body that no one included in the spreadsheet. Unfortunately, it stops being funny the moment it's your portfolio taking the hit. Nearly 2 out of 3 Americans, 64%, say they are more afraid of running out of money in retirement than of dying, according to the 2025 annual retirement study from the Alon Center for the Future of Retirement. That statistic used to read to me like dark humor. Now it reads as completely rational. Here is where the fourth layer of the mistake lives. And this is the one I held back until now, because it is the one capable of sinking a portfolio that survived everything else. It can dismantle a retirement plan that successfully resisted lifestyle inflation, correctly prepared for a forced exit, and accurately modeled healthcare costs. It is invisible during the accumulation phase. It only makes itself known once you begin withdrawing, and it is almost entirely determined by luck, unless you build a deliberate structure to neutralize it. You're probably wondering what could possibly be both that dangerous and that invisible. Let me show you through 2 people. Meet Arthur and Betty. They are siblings. Both retire at 65. Both have saved exactly $1 million. Same portfolio construction, same withdrawal approach. $40,000 per year, adjusted for inflation. Same target average annual return of 7% across 30 years. On paper, they are completely identical. In practice, their retirements will diverge so sharply that one of them will exhaust their savings. Arthur experiences poor returns in the early years. His portfolio drops 15% in year 1, 10% in year 2, and 5% in year 3. The recovery arrives later. After just 3 years, Arthur's portfolio has contracted by 39%. Despite having withdrawn only about 12% of the original balance, every withdrawal Arthur makes during that downturn involves selling shares at a reduced price. Those shares are gone permanently. They cannot participate in the eventual recovery because they no longer exist in his portfolio. When the market rebounds, Arthur is rebuilding from a much smaller foundation. Betty, who experiences the same returns in reverse, the strong years first, the difficult years later, remains fine. Her compounding created a cushion before the losses arrived. Sequence of returns risk is not simply about the average return you receive during retirement. It is about when those returns occur. Two retirees can earn the exact same average annual return over 20 years. But if one experiences significant losses early while simultaneously taking withdrawals, their portfolio can be depleted far more rapidly than the other. Research by Wade Pfau estimates that approximately 77% of a portfolio's final retirement outcome is explained by the returns experienced in just the first 10 years. 77% of whether you run out of money in retirement is determined by what the market does during your first decade of withdrawals. You cannot control when you retire relative to market cycles, but you can build a structure that shields your first 3 to 5 years of withdrawals from having to come from a portfolio that may be declining in value. Cash buffer strategies, bond ladders, non-correlated income sources. These are not tools reserved for cautious investors. They are structural defenses against the one risk that strong average returns simply cannot protect you from. Two retirees with identical portfolios and identical average returns can end up with nearly a $500,000 difference in final portfolio value, based solely on the timing of when losses occurred. Not different investment choices, not different savings rates, purely the sequence in which the market moved. Morningstar's December 2025 State of Retirement Income Report placed the 2026 safe withdrawal rate at 3.9% for portfolios holding between 30% and 60% in equities, based on forward-looking market projections and a 90% probability the money lasts 30 years. The 4% set-it-and-forget-it rule that a generation of financial advisors sold to their clients was constructed from market data going back to 1994. It was a reasonable approximation for a different era, grounded in data that no longer reflects the return environment we are currently planning within. Here is something I find genuinely amusing in that dark comedy way that personal finance sometimes forces on you. The standard conversation most people have with their advisor about retirement readiness is, "Do I have enough?" Nobody asks, "Have I built a buffer specifically for the first 5 years of withdrawals?" Nobody asks, "What is my exposure to sequence of returns risk at this particular portfolio allocation?" These are the questions that actually determine whether the retirement holds together. But they're not part of the standard playbook, because they require more effort than running a Monte Carlo simulation and presenting a color-coded pie chart. Now let me bring Marcus back because his story arrives at a specific destination. Marcus, our 52-year-old project manager, earning $140,000 per year with $380,000 in his 401k. He falls short of the Fidelity benchmark of 6 times salary, which would place him at $840,000. He currently sits at about 45% of where he should be. The guideline recommends having 6 times your annual salary saved by age 50. He missed that milestone, but he has time, at least in theory. Here is what his real situation looks like when the numbers are run, honestly. His company operates in a consolidating industry. He has been with the same firm for 11 years. His role is senior enough to carry a meaningful salary and junior enough to remain a target when cuts are being considered. If he is pushed out at 58, which the Urban Institute data indicates is more probable than not, he has 6 years to build, not 15. 6 years of maximum catch-up contributions at $32,500 annually generates an additional $195,000. Add growth at 7% annually, and he arrives somewhere around $620,000 total. Call it $650,000 with some optimism built in. The number he actually needs, the 2026 Northwestern Mutual Planning and Progress Study, places the figure at $1.46 million to retire comfortably, at a 3.9% withdrawal rate applied to $650,000. Marcus generates $25,350 per year before taxes. The average American household spends over $77,000 annually. Approximately 45% of Americans will face retirement funding shortfalls if they retire at 65, according to Morningstar's projections. Marcus is not in that 45% because he made bad decisions. He's in that 45% because the plan he constructed was built on the assumption that he would control his own exit date. And the data says that assumption is very likely wrong. What could actually change his outcome? Two things that are still available to him at 52. First, he stops redirecting money toward the lake house mortgage and an adult children's financial buffer, and instead treats every available dollar as runway. Each extra dollar invested now at age 52 has 15 years to compound before the earliest plausible forced exit date. Second, he builds a parallel buffer, 2 years of living expenses held in a combination of short-term bonds and cash, specifically designated to protect his portfolio's early withdrawal years from sequence of returns damage. The buffer doesn't generate impressive returns. That isn't its purpose. Its purpose is to ensure he never has to sell equities during a market downturn in his first 3 years of retirement. These are not complicated strategies. They are not recent innovations. They are simply invisible beneath the noise of the broader financial planning conversation, which is still largely having the wrong argument. So here are 3 practical actions that are specific to this problem and not generic advice.